The problem isn't that woodworking is hard. It's that most plans were never meant to be followed all the way through. You can see the final piece. The photos look clean. The layout feels professional. So you assume everything in between is just execution. But then you start. At first, it feels fine. You cut the first pieces. Maybe even the second step makes sense. And then somewhere in the middle, things begin to drift. A measurement doesn't quite line up. A step skips ahead without explaining what just happened. You're suddenly expected to attach something that hasn't really been defined yet. So you pause. You reread. You double-check your cuts. And that's where the frustration starts to build. Because you're not guessing wildly. You're trying to follow the plan. But the more you follow it, the less certain things feel. You adjust, you compensate, you try to make it work. And eventually, one of two things happens. Either the project ends up slightly off, joints don't close perfectly, things feel uneven, or you stop halfway through and tell yourself you'll come back to it later. Most people assume that's just part of the process. That woodworking is supposed to involve trial and error. That mistakes are inevitable. That maybe they just need more experience. But that explanation doesn't really hold up. Because when something goes wrong at the exact same stage across different projects, with different designs, it's probably not random. There's a pattern underneath it. And it usually starts with what the plan doesn't show you. On the surface, most woodworking plans look complete. They show the finished product. They include some measurements, maybe even a materials list. But they often leave out the structure that actually makes the build work. Not the what, but the how in sequence. For example, a plan might tell you to cut panels and then assemble a frame. But it won't always show the exact order those pieces need to come together. It won't explain what needs to be aligned first, what needs to stay loose, what gets locked in permanently. So you end up making decisions mid-build that the plan already should have made for you. And those decisions compound. Another thing that's often missing is tolerance awareness. On paper, a 1/16 of an inch feels insignificant. In reality, that difference can prevent joints from closing, throw off alignment, or force you to recut pieces. But most plans don't account for that. They give you dimensions, but not context. It's a bit like being handed a map with distances, but no terrain. You know how far to go, but not what you'll encounter along the way. Then there's the issue of transitions. This is where a lot of builds quietly fall apart. You'll see one step that ends cleanly, and the next step that assumes everything is already in place. But the connection between those two steps, the actual process of getting from one to the other, is missing. That's where most of the real work is. And when that part isn't clearly defined, the builder has to improvise. Sometimes that works. But most of the time, that's where errors start creeping in. There's also something else that rarely gets addressed. The difference between a plan that looks finished and one that has actually been built. Because a plan can be drawn, measured, and formatted to look complete without ever being tested in a real workspace. And that gap matters more than it seems. When a plan hasn't been physically built, small issues don't show up. Steps that seem obvious on paper turn out to be confusing in practice. Measurements that look fine don't quite translate to real materials. Assembly sequences that appear logical end up creating conflicts. But those problems only reveal themselves during the build. Which means if no one has gone through that process before you become the one discovering all the hidden friction. The real issue isn't that people lack skill. It's that they're working from instructions that were never fully resolved. And that changes how you interpret your own results. Instead of seeing the plan as incomplete, you start questioning your ability. You think you misread something. or rushed a step, or just aren't experienced enough yet. So you slow down. You try to be more careful next time. But if the structure underneath the plan hasn't changed, the outcome usually doesn't either. That's why the difference between struggling and building consistently isn't always about technique. It's about clarity. When the sequence is clear, when the measurements are not just accurate but contextual, when each step leads logically into the next, the process feels completely different. You're not stopping to interpret. You're not backtracking to fix alignment. You're not second-guessing every decision. You're just building. And that shift is subtle. But it's what allows projects to actually move forward. Not perfectly. Not without effort. But without that constant friction that makes everything feel harder than it should be. Because at the end of the day, most unfinished projects aren't abandoned due to lack of motivation. They're abandoned because something stopped making sense. And once that happens, momentum disappears. So if you've ever felt like your projects stall for no clear reason, or that you're doing everything right but still not getting the result you expected, it might not be what you're doing. It might be what you were never shown. If you want to look deeper into how complete plans are actually structured, and what separates them from the ones that fall apart midway, there's a detailed breakdown linked in the description. It walks through the differences step by step. And if this kind of breakdown helps you see your own projects more clearly, you can subscribe for more. Just take your time with it.